We can now speak to Lawrence Korb. He's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense. He joins us from Washington. So the message today from President Trump is that he wants to negotiate, but the problem is he says this after withdrawing from the nuclear deal and after making remarks about wanting to crush Iran, about wanting to bring about the official end of Iran, and now we hear about the prospect of more sanctions. Is there a path to diplomacy here?
Not right now, because basically the president does not have any long-term strategy to deal with Iran. There's no doubt about the fact that he made the right decision in not launching an attack. But the way he made it doesn't give hope to those who want him to do the right thing. Normally, when you have a decision made, you get the various points of view. John Bolton, General Dunford, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, didn't want to do it. And after you get all the points of view, you make a decision. He made a decision, and then he came and canceled it. So he got the worst of all possible worlds. And the idea that you're going to get Iran back to the table by putting more sanctions on is really not going to change things, because the sanctions on there are already devastating. But they're not supported by the Europeans. They're not supported by Russia and China, the other parties to the nuclear deal. What he needs to do is get back to the nuclear deal and then start negotiating about what he sees are flaws in the deal.
The only articulation of U.S. objectives that we've had is from Secretary of State Pompeo, who issued 12 demands to Iran to avoid conflict with the United States. But I mean, that would involve a complete transformation of foreign policy, which would never be acceptable to the Iranians. Given that President Trump wants to avoid war, do you see any room to maneuver on that?
Well, basically, he's got to change. He's not, I mean, if you look at those 12 demands that Pompeo made, you're talking about a complete transformation of Iran. What he needs to recognize is the nuclear deal is separate from everything else. When we negotiated with the Russians, they went into Afghanistan, they put down the rebellion in Czechoslovakia, but we kept going with arms control because that was so important. The most dangerous thing in the region is a nuclear arms race between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And we know the Saudis could move very quickly if they wanted to. That would be completely devastating. That's your main challenge, and you need to deal with that first, and then you can deal with some of these other problems later. But right now, Trump is not only alone with a lot of his advisors, but with even most of our allies.
The Trump administration doesn't see it that way. They see the Iranian nuclear program, along with the missile program and Iran's activities in the region, its support for various groups and proxies, as being all part of sort of one area that has to be tackled simultaneously.
Well, you would like to do that, but that's not the way international politics works. As I mentioned, when we did arms control with the Russians or the Soviets, they were still doing all these horrible things, but the danger from nuclear weapons was so great we were able to do that. Similarly, when we opened relations with China, they were still in the midst of the Cultural Revolution, but we did that to counterbalance the Soviet Union. So yes, you would like Iran eventually to have a much more progressive national security policy, but it's not going to happen right away. And what you need to do is get the nuclear thing back on track. And then over time, I think, as Iran opens up and they begin to trade with the rest of the world, you're going to see a change in the country. But right now, I mean, he's put the IRGC, the Iranian Guard, on a terrorist list. They're the ones who shot down the plane. You can't have another military you want to negotiate if you call them a terrorist.
Well, thank you for now, Lawrence Korb, for sharing your thoughts on the story with us, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense.